Okay, we're going to paint our floors a dirt color. And on the website I've got different recipes of this dirt. So you can go to your hardware store, and if they carry the same brand as what I have listed on the website, you can just give them the color number and they'll mix you up a quart of flat exterior paint for the dirt. And I suggest doing this because you use dirt for a lot of things. You use it for painting the ground before you sprinkle the ground foam, grass, and scenic materials. Now, if they don't have this particular color, I can mail you a color chip of it when you order molds, and you can take this color chip to them and they will just match the color chip and mix you a quart that way. Now, if you would like to mix your own color of dirt, there's a fairly easy way to do that. Because for these projects, you're going to be going to the art store anyway. I would suggest that you use raw umber, acrylic artist tube paint. Raw umber is the perfect color for dirt, but we're going to have to lighten it up with white. And so your question is going to be, well, how much white do you add to it? For this first example, I am using the cheap apple barrel craft paint from Walmart, and it's fairly thin. You can shake it in the bottle and actually, hear it glooping around in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make equal parts of that. The recipe is going to be 1 part of white craft paint, 1 part of raw umber acrylic tube paint, and 1/2 part of water. We're not going to add as much water because this is already kind of thin. So for this example, I'm just going to start out with a white. I'm just going to mix up a tablespoon of each of these. And so I'm just going to fill this about, for a tablespoon of that. And that's going to go in there. And then we're going to see if I can do this here. I'm going to get about a tablespoon of this raw umber. Let's see, that's pretty darn close to a tablespoon of raw umber right there. Notice how I did the thinner paint first, so that would just kind of slide out of there. And then you need a 1/2 part of water. I might suggest mixing this up first before you add the water. That way the paint seems to mix up better. And what you can do is go ahead and mix this up for the dirt color, and then see how it goes onto your floor tile before you add the water to it. My recipe here shows a 1/2 part of water, but that's because I'm using this particular brand of paint and this particular brand of artist paint. And so the thinness may be different from you. I think this is going to be just a little bit too thick here. I'm going to go ahead and add a 1/2 part of water to it, and I'm just going to guess this. Well, that's a little bit much, but we'll just start with that. I won't add all of that. And then we're going to mix this up. Now for a second recipe, I'm not going to use the cheap apple barrel craft paint. I'm going to use white acrylic artist tube paint. Now this stuff is actually much stronger, much thicker, so we're going to have to use a little bit less of it and more of the raw umber in order to get the same shade. So the recipe for that is 1 part white, 2 parts raw umber, and 1.5 parts water. We're adding more water because these two paints are all pretty thick. So let's go ahead and mix that up and see how we do. So we're going to go ahead and start with 1 part white, and you'll notice that this isn't quite as thick as the raw umber paint that we put in before, but you never know. I mean, because different brands have different thicknesses of paint, and also some artist paints are like thick body and thin body, and so you never really know. So there's 1 part of the raw umber, and then I'm going to go ahead and do another part of raw umber, probably about there. That's 2 parts of raw umber. And then we're going to do 1.5 parts of water. But you know what? Before I do that, I think I'm going to mix this up a little bit in order to get the shade kind of to come out right. Because trying to, get things to mix like they're supposed to is a little bit more, difficult. Once you add water in there, trying to get water to dilute artist acrylic tube paints is kind of difficult. You really have to work it a while. Okay, so I'm going to take that right there, and I'm going to go ahead and add the 1.5 parts of water to it. And what you can do is probably a good idea to go ahead and add the 1 part water and see if you actually need the 1/2 part water, because if you mix it too thin, you got to add more paint to it, and then it's kind of more of a problem. Okay, I've mixed this up pretty smooth, and by looking at it, it looks like, well, it's still just a little thick for my taste. When you actually paint it on a floor tile, you might go ahead and paint it on and see how it acts. If you see brush strokes that don't go away, and and they're pretty prominent, then you want to add the extra water. And it almost doesn't hurt to add a little extra water, because this dental stone or this plaster is going to suck some of that water right out of the paint. So if your paint's a little thin, when you put it on here, it's going to kind of suck the moisture out of that paint anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add my half part of water here to it, and then I will go ahead and mix it up, and then I'm going to test it on the floor tiles and see how well this actually paints on. Now for this last recipe, I'm going to use just white house paint. And the Apple Barrel Craft is the cheapest, it's the least powerful. The acrylic tube paint is the most powerful, but white house paint is kind of in between. So we're going to adjust our recipe accordingly. So what I'm going to do is, for the house paint, I'm going to use 1 part house paint, 1.5 parts of the raw umber, and then 1 part water. Okay, let's do a quick recap here of our 3 different types of white we use to mix our dirt color with. The first one uses only 1 part raw umber. The house paint uses 1.5 parts of raw umber, and then the acrylic artist tube paint uses 2 parts of raw umber. The first one with the craft paint needs a 1/2 part water, the house paint needs 1 part water, and the acrylic artist tube paints needs 1.5 parts water. So you can see, as you kind of go up the chain to better and better paints, the amount of colorant you need is less and the amount of water you need is more. And if we compare these 3 colors together, they are really, I mean, for the amount of difference that we had, they are really pretty darn close to spot on the same dirt color that we have for all 3 different recipes. Okay, at this point we're going to go ahead and start painting the floor. Be sure that you actually do a couple of tests, and I've got a couple of tests here, because you want to test how the ink wash is going to go on after you get done. And doing 3 or 4 tests also gives you a chance to practice the dry brushing a little before you get onto your actual floor. Now when you're painting it, your paint mixture needs to be, thin enough, thick enough where it will cover, but we really don't want brush strokes on here. So what you do is, when you paint it on, be sure you use a nice soft brush, and be sure that you'll put it on and then go over it again. Take off, scrape your brush out, and then go over the surface and try to be sure that you get rid of those brush marks if you can. If you get really bad brush marks, that means you probably need to thin your paint down a little bit. And then of course go ahead and paint the sides. And you might want to put a glove or something on your hand, because there's really no way to do this without getting paint on your hands. But we're going to do this for this base coat for all the pieces here.